Now, I do get a lot of comments on the channel from people watching the videos and they're trying to paint their own parts. And I've tried to help a lot of people individually with emails and responding to the comments on the videos. But I thought I'd try to get a lot of the 101 tips onto one video. And when somebody was new to painting, I could just send them the hot link to the video. And I'm going to try to do it on this video. It's basic, simple, usable information for somebody trying to start a project, or maybe they're new to painting, or they're new to painting a motorcycle. And some unique things that I've found work for me under my shop conditions, and how to lay out a paint job, how to use the right primer, how to get the final clear to be highly polished. And I think I've got a lot of them on this video, and you could watch it in 4K, adjust your device. Now, on today's video, I'm going to try to share some basic 101 information for people new to painting. Things that they're basic rules of engagement for doing a custom paint job on a motorcycle or a model plane. Built a little bit different, but pretty much most of the rules apply. Most of the things are the same. And some tips that'll save you not only a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of aggravation. And ask me how I know. I've been doing this my whole life. Now, these tips are in no special order, but I wanted to show what happens, and this is a bike that Luciano and I got for the parts of the bike. We've never used it out on the street or anything, but I wanted to have spare parts. This is a gas tank, and you can see what's happened with the rust. The reason that's happened is because the person that painted it ahead of us, they had the bike, and they probably, I'm guessing, sanded it. And then when they were done, they let it sit for a week before they primed it, so that they trapped the moisture in there. And what happens is years later, and this is a lot of years later, so what happens, the paint bubbles and blisters. So the tip number one, you start with a project, sand it, and within 30 seconds get it primed. If it's metal, self-etching primer, and if it's plastic, the primer that's sealer. It's usually called sealer primer. That is a good tip. That's tip number one. Again, when you go to buy primer, if you're new to this, all primers are not alike. Primer sealer is good to coat if you're going over an old finish. For instance, if you have a gas tank and you don't sand all the old paint down to bare metal, you want to just go over it, you want to rough it up, primer sealer will seal that, hopefully. Self-etching primer is when you use metal, go over metal, and you're down to bare metal, and what you want to do is sand the surface, get it rough. 400 paper would be my first choice. And then immediately, don't let it sit overnight. Go right out and get at least one coat of self-etching primer on it, and that'll ensure that you don't see those bubbles like I showed in that part that we got from the bike we bought for parts. Another tip, and again, these are not in any specific order, but it's a great tip, is get some concept sketches. Get an idea in your mind of what you want the final project to look like when you're finished. You can do that a lot of times by taking a picture on your computer of the side view to top view of the motorcycle, and then just printing it out on paper if you have a black and white printer, or convert the color photo into black and white, and then use that as a pattern to lay out your new paint job. And we've done that many times. Now, here are some of the little sketches that I made, and I did these from having a picture that's been bleached out to black and white, and then using colored crayons or pencils or even paint, to be honest, to lay that paint job out ahead of time. That saved me a lot of work. Another random tip that gets by a lot of people: you have a bike and you want to paint some parts that you made or added or whatever. You want to paint some flat black parts, but you want the paint to match. Well, one of the things is you can get a company like Colorite to get you some matching paint. But a lot of people, what they do, they don't buy enough paint. So what happens is, and I've advised several people on this, buy more paint than you need, because you never know when you're going to scratch it, or you're going to want to add a part or paint something else. And then years later, you can paint right from the same can. That's an exact match to your original part. Now, having concept sketches is really a handy thing, but in a case like this, and I'm just going to use this paint job as a good example, similar to the FCR. You got to look at the colors and decide which color you're going to paint first and how you're going to do the backmasking. I call that mapping the paint job. And mapping the paint job can save you a lot of backmasking, a lot of work, a lot of aggravation. Now this is easy to show with a storyboard. An example of something that you're going to lay out your custom painting. And you laid this out so that this stripe is one color, and this stripe is another color, and the tank is another color. So if you think about it, and this is really a good tip, this is worth its weight in gold. If one of the stripes is white, and usually it's the thinnest stripe, it's called an outline stripe, and I'll show some of the projects that I worked on that I use this to my advantage. What you want to do, and it sounds like this wouldn't work, but it works perfectly. You paint the whole tank white. Then you lay out this one piece of tape where the stripe is, and that's going to stay white for the rest of the paint job. You're never going to take that tape off until the whole paintwork's done. Now you look for the second color and where you save the time. Now let's say this color is red, just to make an example up. You're going to be painting the red over white, which means you're going to use half of the amount of paint, and it's going to be much more brilliant. Okay, and let's just assume this is blue. This color here is blue, just to make it an easy thing. So what you want to do now is you already have this masked off. Now you mask this off too. So that now you have this. Notice there's very little backmasking here. And now paint the blue. So now the only backmasking, you've never had to re-backmask the whole tank. So think about it, if you painted the tank red first or blue, you would need backmasking and tape coming up, you'd waste a lot of time and money in tape. You'd have too many, and the tape edges would be twice as thick. But if you paint, if one of the colors is white, I always paint the whole part white first. Now, if it's a model airplane, it's a little bit different. What you do with a model airplane, and I'll try to show the idea of this, you paint the whole part silver first, because on a model plane, you're trying to save weight. Motorcycle, who cares about the weight? So what happens is, by painting it silver, you need a lot less white to go on there. The white goes over the silver beautifully, it's bright, and then your red and your blue or green or whatever color comes up is just that much nicer. But things to never do. Never paint the whole thing red and then try to paint a white stripe. It'll be a pink stripe somewhere down the road, and you'll have a tape edge. The tape edge will be the quarter of an inch. So this concept of how to lay out a custom paint job, critical thing. I've had this on many of the videos, but I'm trying to aim this video at 101 tips that will be helpful and useful right away. Now, if you look at the model airplane in this photo, it's exactly how that lettering was done with the white stripe around the letters. That's all freehand. There are no decals. No computer was used to lay this out. This is all laid out by hand, and it's on our model airplane channel. But right now, that's how this was done, and matching R1 paint. Now, one of the choices you always have, you can make your own graphics. See, now if I bought this as a decal, what would happen is it wouldn't be an exact match. It might be close, but it would not be exact. Now, when I did this, I wanted an exact match. The wheels, the trim, the logos, I wanted everything to match. So what I did, I mixed my own gold paint with pigment. That's out on our video channel. That's a complex thing. But the graphics, with the computers we have now, making a pattern for those graphics, relatively straightforward and easy. Thomas Luciano and John Pothia helped me with all the graphics over the years, and that's a whole nother thing, because on this bike, I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted everything to be an exact match, not close, but no cigar. And getting graphics for older bikes, this is Joe Padula's Ducati 888. These decals had to come from Australia, and it took months to get them while we had this repair in the shop. But ultimately, we got them and made them match. And we've got a lot of custom wheel videos out on our channel. And what I think is an appropriate thing is, if you're interested in doing wheels, watch those videos before you do it. Make sure you have all the little tricks and steps that I showed It made doing the wheels on all of the bikes in my collection relatively easy. Another really good tip, I did some custom mixing of paint. I had a spare RD wheel. Do a spare wheel if you're doing this, and make sure you're happy with the way it worked out and you know what you're getting yourself in for before you move on to doing real wheels that are going to be on the bike probably for the rest of the time that you own the bike. Another thing I always suggest to people, and there's no reason to pay somebody else to do this if you're so inclined and you have a little bit of energy, a little bit of time to do it, and we usually do all of this work only in the winter when it's too cold to ride. If you start a project in the summer, you're going to want to rush through it and try to get the bike finished so you can go ride it. If you're doing it when there's 6 inches of snow out in the driveway, you'll be less inclined to rush through it. Now, if you buy thinner, the key is, and I would suggest this is if you're new to painting, all of your thinner be medium. The word medium is a critical part of this. What happens if you buy fast drying? You run the risk of having the paint delaminate or peel off like sandpaper, especially if you use an airbrush or you paint dry. Medium is kind of the middle ground that works 99% of the time. And fast, the slow drying, that usually results in a shinier surface. You sometimes lose the bond between coats because the surface is too shiny. Or it'll take a really long time to dry, and that can be a problem in cold weather. So my suggestion is, again, you buy any thinner when you're new to painting, let it all be medium thinner, medium dry time. And no matter what paint job you're going to try to simulate or copy, it's always a good idea to have that concept sketch first. So handy, you can't imagine how much time it saves you in the overall job. Hey, this is a question a lot of people are not sure about if they're new to painting. What would be the step 1, step 2, step 3 along the way? Now, all of the videos that I put on YouTube, and there's 3,000, there's more than 3,000, they make projects step 1, step 2. Some of them go into many videos. Most people think they're too long, but I try not to leave out any steps. And in this case, this is the part a lot of people, if you miss one step in here, you run the risk that something bad is going to happen, or you're going to spend twice the amount of time. This stuff should be that you don't have to go back and do it over 3 or 4 times. So number 1, to sand the part. If it's metal, if it's plastic, 400 sand it. Prime with the primer that I just explained and showed the primer. Doesn't matter what brand, all of the brands seem to work, but not with generic primer where the can just says primer. That's people doing hot rod cars or doing Bondo or something. This is use self-etching primer or the sealer primer. So I like to sand the primer. I like to sand it with 400 and maybe even prime it twice to get it nice and smooth, because from this point on you're building a foundation of a house, and if this is straight and smooth, everything from this point on goes pretty smooth. Then you want to paint, and I showed the steps in the previous storyboard. I find these storyboards really useful. They're kind of crude, but it doesn't matter. The objective of my videos is to get the information across, not to make Gone with the Wind. Paint the part, step 1, step 2. You know, you've got all the colors done. Now, a lot of people want to know, once you pull up the tape, do you sand the edges with sandpaper? I say no, never. That's going to be a problem. Number 2, never sand anything that's metallic. You're going to see the sanding scratches. Never. So what I do is I use a credit card and just, if the edges are rough, clean it up with a credit card at a 45-degree angle. I've shown that on many of the paint videos. Then the clear. And any of the big brands that clear, the 4-to-1 clear, they seem to be easy to use. When you're at this point here, from this point on, you want to wear a mask. This is toxic stuff. So putting on 2 to 3 coats of clear, I find if you let it dry a half hour to 45 minutes between coats in warm weather, 70, 60-degree weather, but I paint in cold weather. So a lot of times I'll let this dry overnight or even 2 days. Then when I have this amount of clear on, I want to sand it with 1000 grit paper, because I don't want to have those edges. One of my tests of a good paint job is, and I've judged many model airplane contests where they were world champion caliber people. You want to run your hand over a paint edge and not feel the edge. That's a critical thing. Well, a lot of people that they paint the bike, they don't even know that's one of the things that you're going to look at. And right here, if you sand that with 1000 grit, get it nice and smooth, and then put on a nice final coat of clear. Let that clear, the final coat, dry 2-3 days. I know people have a counterpoint to this and they say, oh, you can buff it in an hour later. I've found under my shop conditions and painting in cold weather that the best, if you're going to buff the paint, let it sit for a while. Now, what I suggest is if you're really new to this, I have plenty of videos that show every step, and I have plenty of videos that start at the beginning of a project like the 650 or the 750 or the MT-09, where we made the parts from carbon fiber and then went through this process over the course of 3 or 4 videos, maybe more. But look at it on video. Maybe you're going to spend a couple hours watching video, but you'll save the time in the long run. And I think ultimately by doing this, I don't think I've left out any steps that would help everybody on doing their first paint job or making their second or third paint job a lot better. And plenty of my friends have responded to the videos and said, wow, I had no trouble. I know Stephen Walker's painted things. I know Scott's painted things, people that I know personally. And this process, there's a lot of shortcuts you can take, but if you do this methodically, I would almost guarantee in the end you're going to have a really nice paint job. So I hope this information was of some value, usable. I found it to be the rules of engagement for working in my shop and doing all of the projects I've done, of which there are many. And I would always say this, if in doubt, practice. Find some old parts to practice on. Practice, practice, practice. That's one of the things that I believe in, really. And all of these steps that I've shown, they all work pretty well for me. And an awful lot of people have learned how to paint in my shop. The list goes on. And I think it's safe to say every one of them has enjoyed the project, and you take a lot of pride in it when you're done. And there's no reason, especially if you have some practice parts, give it a shot. And again, as always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks guys so much for watching.